The invitation sat on my kitchen counter for 3 weeks before I finally opened it. Heavy cream cardstock with embossed gold lettering that screamed old money and older traditions. The Harper Family Thanksgiving Gathering, it read in elegant script, but it was the handwritten note from my mother, Patricia, that made my stomach drop. Daniel, you're welcome to attend, but given your circumstances, we've arranged seating in the garden pavilion with the younger cousins. Perhaps next year you'll have earned a place at the main table. I stared at those words until they blurred. Earned a place. At my own family's Thanksgiving dinner? I was 33 years old and apparently still not worthy of sitting with the adults. What my mother didn't know, what none of them knew, was that 2 weeks earlier, I'd signed a deal that would change everything. And when I showed up to that Thanksgiving dinner, the family that had spent a decade telling me I was wasting my life was about to learn exactly what I'd built in the shadows they'd cast me into. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I'm Daniel Harper, and the reason I haven't sat at my family's table in 10 years starts long before that invitation arrived. Growing up as the middle child in the Harper family meant living in a very specific kind of pressure cooker. We weren't just wealthy, we were legacy wealthy, the kind of family whose name appeared on buildings around Portland and whose Christmas cards featured professional photography sessions that cost more than most people's monthly rent. My father, William, ran Harper and Associates Real Estate Development, a company his grandfather founded in 1947 that had grown into a Pacific Northwest empire. Every shopping center, every office complex, every luxury apartment building from Seattle to Eugene seemed to have Harper money behind it. Our home in Lake Oswego wasn't just a house, it was a statement. 8,000 square feet of colonial architecture sitting on 2 acres of waterfront property overlooking the lake, with gardens that required a full-time landscaping crew and a circular driveway that could accommodate 20 cars during the parties my mother loved to throw. Patricia Harper, my mother, had turned being a Harper into a full-time career. She sat on charity boards, organized fundraisers, and made sure everyone in their social circle knew exactly where the Harper family stood in the hierarchy of Portland society. She had a way of smiling that looked warm in photographs but felt cold in person, especially if you were disappointing her, which I did frequently. My older brother Andrew was everything they wanted in a son. He graduated from Stanford with a business degree, joined the family company at 23, married his college sweetheart Victoria, who came from another real estate family, and produced 2 perfect grandchildren right on schedule. By the time Drew was 30, he was a vice president at Harper and Associates, lived in a house 3 streets away from our parents, and had mastered the art of making our father proud. Every Sunday dinner, every holiday gathering, every family photo featured Drew at the center, the golden son who'd done everything right. He had this way of looking at me that wasn't quite pity and wasn't quite contempt, but something in between that made me feel like I was a problem he was too polite to mention directly. My younger sister Emily was the baby, and she'd carved out her own path by becoming a pediatric surgeon, which even our parents had to admit was respectable. She worked at Oregon Health and Science University, saved children's lives, and somehow managed to do it all while maintaining the Harper image of polished perfection. Emily and I had been close as kids, but as we got older and I started diverging from the family plan, she'd gotten quieter around me, like she didn't want to be associated with my choices in front of our parents. The expectations in our family weren't subtle. Every dinner conversation revolved around business deals, property acquisitions, market trends, and who was doing what to advance the Harper legacy. My father would hold court at the head of our massive dining table, his silver hair perfectly styled, his suits custom-tailored, talking about million-dollar developments like other fathers talked about their golf games. My mother would orchestrate everything around him, making sure the wine was perfect, the food was impeccable, and the conversation never touched on anything that might be considered unseemly or common. Her best friend Margaret Stevens was always there, a sharp-faced woman who'd known my mother since college and who seemed to take personal pleasure in other people's shortcomings. I was supposed to follow Drew's path, attend a good university, study business or finance, join the Harper and Associates, learn the family business from the ground up, marry someone from an appropriate family, and continue building the Harper empire. It was all mapped out, discussed openly, assumed without question. But I'd never wanted any of it. While Drew was interning at the company during high school summer's months, I was in my room teaching myself animation software and digital design. While my parents hosted dinner parties with clients and colleagues, I was online connecting with other artists and creators, exploring worlds that had nothing to do with commercial real estate or quarterly earnings reports. I loved creating things: digital art, animated shorts, character design, world building. I'd spend hours sketching in notebooks during family dinners, only half listening to conversations about zoning regulations and construction permits. My father would notice and frown, asking if I had something more important to do than pay attention to my family. My mother would give me that tight smile and suggest I focus on my studies instead of doodling. Margaret would chime in with some comment about how artistic hobbies were fine for children, but adults needed real careers. Only Emily would sometimes sneak into my room later to see what I'd been working on, her eyes wide as she looked at the characters and stories I was building. When I was 16, I tried to explain to my parents what I wanted to do with my life. We were having one of those formal Sunday dinners that happened every week without fail, extended family included. Uncle Thomas and Aunt Rebecca were there, along with my cousins Jennifer and Brandon. Everyone was discussing Drew's acceptance to Stanford, toasting his future, talking about how he'd come back and revolutionize the family business with his fresh ideas and education. I waited until there was a pause in the conversation and said, I wanted to study animation and game design. The table went quiet. My father set down his wine glass slowly, the crystal making a sharp
sound against the mahogany. He looked at me like I'd announced I wanted to join the circus. Animation, he repeated, his voice flat. And dame design? I nodded, feeling my face flush, but pushing forward anyway. I tried to explain that the gaming industry was exploding, that there were real careers in digital art and interactive media, that I'd been building a portfolio and had already gotten positive feedback from online communities. My mother interrupted me, her voice carrying that tone she used when she was being patient with something that tried her patience greatly. Daniel, those are hobbies, she said. They're fine for entertainment, but they're not a foundation for a life. You need something stable, something real. Margaret nodded enthusiastically from across the table. Patricia's absolutely right, she said, reaching for another dinner roll. These computer games and cartoons, they're not serious work. What happens when you're 40 and still playing with drawings? My Uncle Thomas, never one to miss an opportunity to reinforce family values, added his perspective. The Harper name means something in this region, he said, his voice carrying the authority of the eldest brother. We've built that reputation through generations of hard work and real business, real estate, construction, development. That's tangible. That's legacy. Drew looked uncomfortable but said nothing. Emily stared at her plate. My father leaned back in his chair, studying me with an expression I'd seen him use with contractors who disappointed him. If you want to waste your free time on computer games, fine, he said finally, but you'll study business at a good university, you'll do internships with the company, and you'll prepare yourself for a real career. This conversation is over. Except it wasn't over for me. I spent the next 2 years fighting a quiet war with my parents. They pushed me toward business programs. I researched art schools. They arranged for me to shadow executives at Harper & Associates. I spent those days sketching in coffee shops instead. They talked about my future at the company. I built my portfolio and applied to schools they'd never heard of. The tension in our house became something you could feel the moment you walked in, a constant undercurrent of disappointment and defiance. When I got accepted to Pacific Northwest College of Art in Portland with a focus on digital media and interactive design, I thought
preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
maybe they'd see I was serious. Instead, my father called it a waste of my potential, and my mother actually cried. Not sad tears, but angry ones, like I'd personally betrayed her. We can't tell people our son is going to art school, she said, her voice shaking. What will they think? What will we say when they ask about your future? I pointed out that it was my future, not theirs, which was apparently the wrong thing to say. My father stood up from his study desk, his face darkening. As long as you live under this roof and we pay your expenses, it's our future too, he said. You want to throw away the opportunities we've given you, the name we've built for some fantasy about making cartoons? Then you can do it on your own dime. I was 18 and stupid and angry, so I said fine. I moved out 3 days later, taking what I could fit in my beat-up Honda Civic that I'd bought with money from a summer job Drew had gotten me at the company. I found a 500-square-foot studio apartment in Southeast Portland, the kind of neighborhood my mother would never set foot in, with thin walls and a radiator that clanged all night and the view of a parking lot. I worked 3 jobs that first year: morning shifts at a coffee shop near campus, afternoon delivery driving for a local restaurant, and overnight shelf stocking at a grocery store twice a week. I slept maybe 4 hours a night, lived on ramen and whatever food I could get cheap or free from my restaurant job, and spent every other waking moment either in class or working on my projects. My parents didn't contact me for 6 months. No calls, no texts, nothing. It was like I'd ceased to exist for them. Emily would sneak me messages sometimes, telling me about family dinners where my empty chair stayed empty and nobody mentioned my name. Drew sent one email asking if I'd come to my senses yet, offering to talk to Dad about getting me an entry position at the company if I transferred to a real school. I didn't respond. The only family member who reached out with any genuine warmth was my 16-year-old niece, Olivia, Drew's daughter. She found me on social media and started following my work, sending me messages about how cool my animations were and asking questions about digital art. I told her not to mention it to her parents. College was brutal, but incredible. I was surrounded by people who understood what I was trying to do, professors who took my work seriously, peers who challenged me to get better. I learned 3D modeling, character rigging, environmental design, narrative structure for interactive media. I worked on student projects that won local competitions. I started building a real portfolio, not just hobby sketches, but professional quality work. But I was also exhausted all the time, broke constantly, and increasingly isolated from anything resembling a normal social life. I'd see posts from Drew about family vacations to Hawaii, my mother's charity galas, Sunday dinners I wasn't invited to. Sometimes it hurt. Most of the time, I was too tired to care. Then I met Lauren Foster in my junior year. She was in pre-med at Portland State, brilliant and driven and completely unimpressed by family money or social status since she'd grown up without either. We met at the coffee shop where I worked morning shifts. She'd come in every day at 6 a.m. before her classes, always ordered the same thing, and one morning she noticed me sketching character designs on my break. "Those are really good," she said, leaning over to look closer. "What are they for?" I explained I was working on a game design project, and she asked questions that showed she was actually interested, not just being polite. We started talking every morning, then we started meeting outside of my work, then we started dating, and for the first time since I'd left home, I felt like someone saw me as something other than a disappointment or a cautionary tale. Lauren's support kept me going through the hardest parts. When I was working myself sick trying to balance jobs and school, she'd show up with actual food and force me to take breaks. When I doubted whether any of this was worth it, whether my parents might be right that I was chasing a fantasy, she'd remind me why I'd started. When I graduated with honors and my family didn't attend the ceremony, she and her mother were there cheering louder than anyone. My parents sent a card, no check inside, just a note saying they hoped I'd gotten this out of my system and was ready to discuss my future. I threw it away. After graduation, the real struggle began. I had a degree in digital media and interactive design,
A portfolio I was proud of, and absolutely no clear path forward. The gaming industry was competitive beyond anything I'd imagined. Every entry-level position had hundreds of applicants, most with more connections or experience than I had. I sent out applications to every studio within a 3-hour radius of Portland. I got rejection after rejection, or worse, just silence. The few interviews I landed went nowhere. I was 22, working the same coffee shop job I'd had in college, plus picking up freelance graphic design work whenever I could find it, still living in that same tiny studio apartment, and starting to wonder if my parents had been right all along.
Lauren had gotten into medical school at Oregon Health and Science University, the same hospital where Emily worked, which meant she was studying 80 hours a week, and I barely saw her. When we did have time together, I tried not to let her see how much I was struggling, how close I was to giving up. But she knew. One night, after a particularly brutal day where I'd gotten 3 rejection emails in a row, she found me staring at my laptop, not even pretending to work. "Talk to me," she said, sitting down next to me on my sagging couch. I told her everything. How I felt like I'd burned every bridge with my family for nothing. How I was starting to think my father was right, that this was all a fantasy. How I didn't know what I was doing wrong because my work was good. I knew it was good, but it didn't seem to matter. She listened to everything without interrupting, then said something I've never forgotten. "You know what your problem is? You're trying to get someone else to give you permission to succeed. You're applying to their companies, following their rules, waiting for them to decide you're good enough. Stop waiting for permission. Build something yourself." That conversation changed everything. I stopped sending applications to big studios and started working on my own project. I'd had an idea for years, a story-driven adventure game about climate change and environmental restoration. But I'd always thought I needed a team, funding, a company behind me. Instead, I decided to build it myself, or as much of it as I could manage alone. I worked on that game every moment I wasn't at my coffee shop job. I taught myself programming languages I didn't know, figured out sound design through online tutorials, wrote and rewrote the narrative until it felt right. I called it Watershed, a game where players worked to restore damaged ecosystems and saw the direct impact of their environmental choices. It took me 2 years of 18-hour days, of sacrificing any kind of social life, of eating rice and beans for weeks at a time to afford the software licenses I needed. Lauren was doing her medical residency by then, just as broke and busy as I was. But we'd moved in together to a slightly less terrible apartment, and we kept each other going through the worst of it.
Built something significant. I wanted my mother to understand that her embarrassment about my choices had been misplaced. I wanted Drew to know I hadn't needed the family company to succeed. It was petty, maybe, but it was honest. So when Emily called me out of nowhere on a Tuesday afternoon, her voice strained and formal, saying that Mom wanted to invite me to Thanksgiving dinner, my first instinct was suspicion. "We haven't seen you in years," Emily said, and I could hear the careful neutrality in her tone, like she was reading from a script. "Mom thinks it's time to try to reconnect. It would mean a lot to her if you came." I asked Emily directly what had changed. Why now, after 10 years of barely speaking, did they suddenly want me at Thanksgiving? There was a long pause. "I think she saw something online," Emily said finally. "About your game. About you." I felt my stomach drop. "What did she see?" I asked. But Emily didn't know the details, just that Patricia had been on some parent forum or charity board discussion where someone mentioned Watershed and the Harper name came up somehow, maybe through a mutual acquaintance, maybe through the college I had attended. However it happened, my mother now knew that her failure son had done something notable, and suddenly I was welcome back at the family table. Except not really welcome, as it turned out. The invitation that arrived made that clear. I was invited to attend, but I'd be seated in the garden pavilion with the younger cousins and family friends, not at the main table in the formal dining room where the real Harpers sat. My mother's notes spelled it out plainly. "Given your circumstances and the time that's passed, we thought it best to ease you back into family gatherings gradually. Perhaps next year, if things go well, you can join us at the main table." I read that line probably 20 times. Perhaps next year you'll have earned a place. Like sitting with my own family was a privilege I had to work toward. Like a decade of success in my chosen field hadn't proven anything because it wasn't success they recognized or valued. Lauren found me in my office that evening, the invitation still in my hand. She read it over my shoulder and I heard her sharp intake of breath. "Are you kidding me right now?" she said. her voice tight with anger. "They're putting you at the kids' table? At your own family's Thanksgiving?" I explained the garden pavilion wasn't technically the kids' table. It was where they put younger family members and plus ones and people who weren't part of the inner circle. "It's separate from the main house," I told her, "connected by a covered walkway with its own catering setup and everything. They use it for overflow when they have too many people to fit in the formal dining room." Lawrence stared at me. "Danny, that's worse. That's so much worse. They're literally putting you in overflow seating at your own family dinner." She was right, of course, but there was something about that invitation, about the casual cruelty of it, that made me want to go. Not to seek their approval or beg for a better seat. I wanted to show up and let them maintain their assumptions about my circumstances right up until the moment those assumptions shattered. I'd spent 10 years building a career they knew nothing about. I'd married an incredible woman they'd never met. I'd created work that mattered, that helped people, that stood on its own merit without the Harper name attached. And they thought I was still the struggling art school dropout who'd embarrassed them by choosing passion over their real estate empire. I told Lauren I wanted to accept the invitation. She looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "Why would you put yourself through that?" she asked. "These people cut you off, Danny. They made you feel worthless for following your dreams. Now they want you to sit in the backup dining room like some distant relative they're obligated to include." I understood her reaction, but I'd made my decision. "I'm not going there to win them back or prove I need them," I said. "I'm going to show them exactly who I became without them, and I want you there with me." Lauren studied my face for a long moment, then shook her head with a slight smile. "You're either incredibly brave or incredibly stubborn," she said. "Probably both. When do we leave?" The plan came together over the next 2 weeks. I'd been in negotiations with Evergreen about a new role, a promotion to creative director that came with significant equity and a seat on their leadership team. The announcement was scheduled for the week after Thanksgiving, but I asked if we could move it up. I also reached out to a contact at Portland Business Journal who'd interviewed me the previous year about Watershed's educational impact. I mentioned I'd be in Portland for the holiday and would she be interested in running a feature about the upcoming expansion of Watershed into virtual reality technology and international markets. She jumped at it, and the article was scheduled to run Thanksgiving morning, complete with photos and details about my role at Evergreen. I didn't tell my family any of this. When my mother called to confirm I was coming, her voice had that bright, artificial quality she used with people she was being polite to, but didn't particularly like. "We're so glad you'll be joining us, Daniel," she said. "It'll be nice to catch up after all this time." I asked if I could bring Lauren. There was a pause. "Your girlfriend?" my mother asked, and I corrected her. "My wife. We've been married for 6 years. Another pause, longer this time. "Oh," my mother said finally. "Well, yes, of course she can come. We'll make sure there's space for her in the pavilion." I thanked her and ended the call before she could ask any more questions. The drive from Seattle to Portland on Thanksgiving morning took just under 3 hours. Lauren drove while I sat in the passenger seat, alternating between confidence and anxiety. I dressed carefully, a tailored charcoal suit that Lauren had insisted I buy for conferences, subtle but expensive, the kind of thing that looked understated until you knew what to look for. Lauren wore a deep blue dress that made her look simultaneously professional and stunning. Her dark hair pulled back, minimal jewelry. We looked successful, which was the point. As we got closer to Lake Oswego, Lauren reached over and squeezed my hand. She said, "You know we can still turn around, right? You don't owe these people anything." "I know," I told her, "but I want them to see what they missed. I want them to know what I built without their money or their name or their approval." The Harper estate looked exactly as I remembered it. The circular driveway was already packed with luxury cars, BMWs and Mercedes and Teslas belonging to family members and their wealthy friends. The house itself was decorated for fall with expensive restraint. Professional arrangements of seasonal flowers and elegant wreaths, everything coordinated in the burgundy and gold color scheme my mother favored. Through the Large front windows, I could see people already gathering in the formal living room, cocktails in hand, the same scene that had played out every Thanksgiving of my childhood. I parked my Audi, another conference present from Lauren, who'd insisted I stop driving my dying Honda, and we walked toward the entrance. My mother answered the door herself, playing the gracious hostess. She was 60 now, but looked a decade younger thanks to excellent genes and better cosmetic work. Her blonde hair perfectly styled, wearing a cream-colored dress that probably cost more than my first car. "Daniel," she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. She leaned in for an air kiss that didn't actually make contact with my cheek. "And you must be Laura?" "Lauren, my wife," corrected gently, offering her hand. "It's wonderful to meet you, Mrs. Harper." My mother's smile tightened slightly as she shook Lauren's hand, her eyes taking in every detail of Lauren's dress, her shoes, her simple wedding ring, clearly assessing and categorizing. Come in," my mother said, stepping back. "Most everyone's already here. The pavilion is set up beautifully. You'll be very comfortable out there." Before I could respond, my father appeared from his study, a tumbler of expensive scotch already in his hand. He'd aged more noticeably than my mother, his hair completely silver now, lines deep around his eyes and mouth. He stopped when he saw me, and for a moment something flickered across his face that might have been surprise, or regret, or just indigestion. "Daniel," he said, his voice gruff. "It's been a while." 10 years, I said evenly. "Dad, this is my wife, Lauren." My father's eyebrows rose slightly at wife, but he covered it quickly, offering Lauren a handshake that was probably firmer than necessary. "Welcome," he said. "Any friend of Daniel's is welcome here." "We're married," I said again, keeping my voice pleasant but firm. "Lauren's my wife. We've been married for 6 years." My mother made a small sound that might have been surprise or disapproval. "You didn't mention you were married," she said, her tone carrying a note of accusation. "I didn't think you'd be interested," I replied. "We haven't exactly been close." An awkward silence settled over the entryway. Through the doorway to the living room, I could see other family members starting to notice the commotion, heads turning our direction. My brother Drew emerged from the crowd, older and heavier than I remembered, his hairline receding, his expensive suit straining slightly at the buttons. He had a wine glass in one hand, and that same expression of vague concern he'd always worn when dealing with me. "Danny," Drew said, using the childhood nickname like we'd seen each other last week instead of a decade ago. "Mom said you were coming. Wasn't sure you'd actually show up." He looked at Lauren with open curiosity. "And who's this?" "My wife, Lauren," I said for the third time. "Lauren, this is my brother, Andrew." Drew's face registered genuine surprise. "Wife?" he said. "When did this happen?" "About 6 years ago," Lauren said smoothly, her hand finding mine. "It's wonderful to finally meet Daniel's family. He's told me so much about you all." I caught the subtle edge in her voice and loved her even more for it. Before Drew could respond, my mother interjected with her hostess voice, bright and artificially warm. "Well, this is wonderful news, isn't it, William? Our Daniel married! We'll have to get all the details later. Right now, though, dinner will be served soon, so let me show you two to the pavilion where you'll be sitting." She gestured toward the back of the house, toward the French doors that led to the garden and the separate structure where I'd been relegated. I was about to follow when Margaret Stevens, my mother's eternal sidekick, appeared from the living room, her sharp features arranged in an expression of delighted surprise. "Patricia, is this Daniel?" she exclaimed, her voice carrying back to the assembled guests. "My goodness, I almost didn't recognize you. It's been, what, 15 years?" 10, I corrected. Margaret waved a dismissive hand. "Time flies when you're busy with important things," she said, her eyes glinting with malice disguised as friendliness. "So, tell us, what are you doing these days? Still working at that coffee shop?" The question was designed to embarrass me, to establish my place in the hierarchy before we even made it to dinner. I felt Lauren stiffen beside me, felt my parents watching, felt Drew shifting uncomfortably. This was the moment. I could deflect, make a joke, let them maintain their assumptions. Or I could start dismantling those assumptions right here in the entryway.
Actually, Margaret, I said, keeping my tone casual, I haven't worked at the coffee shop in about 7 years. I'm creative director at Evergreen Interactive in Seattle. We develop environmental and social impact games. Her eyes narrowed slightly, not sure whether to be impressed or dismissive. Games, she repeated, the word carrying just enough disdain to be insulting. How nice. You always did love your little computer hobbies. Lauren's hand squeezed mine, a warning or support, or both. My mother jumped in quickly, clearly trying to move us along before this conversation could go anywhere uncomfortable. That's lovely, Daniel. Gaming is certainly popular these days, isn't it, William? Now let's get you two settled before dinner. But my father was looking at me with a different expression now, something calculating. Evergreen Interactive, he said slowly. That's the company that made that environmental education game. What was it called? My heart started beating faster. Watershed, I said. They didn't make it, though. I did. I designed and developed Watershed. Evergreen acquired it 6 years ago and brought me on as lead designer. The silence that followed was deafening. My mother's bright hostess smile froze. Drew's wine glass stopped halfway to his mouth. Margaret's eyes widened. My father stared at me like I'd just announced I was an alien. You made Watershed? Emily's voice came from the living room doorway. My sister emerged from the crowd, looking elegant in a burgundy dress, her face showing genuine shock. Danny! Olivia uses Watershed in her environmental science class. She talks about it constantly. It's won awards. As if summoned by her name, my 17-year-old niece pushed past her mother, her phone already in her hand. Wait, Uncle Danny, you made Watershed? The actual game? You're that Daniel Harper? I smiled at her, the first genuine smile since walking in. I am, I told her, though I credited it under Daniel Foster, so most people don't connect it to the Harper name. Olivia looked like she might explode with excitement. Oh my God, that game literally changed how I think about environmental science. We use it at school and I've probably played it like 50 times. This is insane. Why didn't anyone tell me my uncle made Watershed? Because nobody knew, Drew said quietly, his voice carrying something that might have been embarrassment or regret.
Regret. We had no idea. The crowd from the living room was spilling into the entryway now, family members and friends drawn by the commotion. I recognized Uncle Thomas and Aunt Rebecca, Cousin Jennifer with her husband, Brandon looking older and more tired than I remembered. They were all staring at me with varying expressions of confusion and curiosity. My mother had recovered her composure, but her smile was strained. "Well, isn't that something?" she said, her voice tight. "You've been busy, Daniel. We should definitely catch up more over dinner. Speaking of which, let me show you and Laura to the pavilion." "Lauren," my wife corrected again, her voice pleasant but firm. "And actually, Mrs. Harper, I'm wondering why we're being seated separately from the family. We drove 3 hours to be here for Thanksgiving. It seems odd to put us in a different building." The directness of the question caught my mother off guard. Her carefully maintained social grace flickered. "Well," she said, faltering slightly, "it's just that the main table is quite full with immediate family and our closest friends, and we thought you'd be more comfortable with the younger generation." "I'm 33 years old," I said quietly. "I'm not exactly the younger generation anymore, and I am immediate family. So is Lauren. She's been part of this family for 6 years, whether you knew it or not." My father cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with the confrontation happening in his entryway in front of guests. "Daniel," he said, his voice carrying that edge of authority he'd always used to end arguments, "your mother has arranged the seating. If you're not comfortable with that arrangement, perhaps you'd prefer to leave." The words hung in the air like a challenge. This was the same ultimatum he'd given me at 18, the same power play, comply or get out. Except I wasn't 18 anymore, and I didn't need anything from him. Before I could respond, Lauren spoke up, her voice clear and calm. "That won't be necessary, Mr. Harper," she said. "We'll stay for dinner. But I think you should know that the article about Daniel's work runs in Portland Business Journal tomorrow morning. It discusses his role as creative director at Evergreen.
the acquisition of Watershed, and the new virtual reality expansion that's launching next quarter. It also mentions his promotion to the leadership team and his equity position in a company valued at over $500 million. The article calls him one of the Pacific Northwest's most innovative voices in environmental gaming and social impact technology. It's already getting picked up by national publications. The silence was absolute. Every person in that entryway was staring at us now. My mother's face had gone pale. Drew looked like he'd been slapped. Margaret's mouth was literally hanging open. My father's grip on his scotch glass had tightened until his knuckles were white. Uncle Thomas broke the silence first. $500 million? He said, his voice uncertain. You have equity in a company valued at $500 million? Lauren nodded. The last valuation put Evergreen at $580 million, actually, she said. Daniel holds approximately 3% through his various agreements and stock options. He's also the creative force behind their 3 most successful titles and is leading development on their next major project, which has a production budget of $40 million. Olivia let out a low whistle. Uncle Danny, you're rich, she said bluntly, and famous in gaming circles. This is so cool. Why has nobody been talking about this? Because nobody asked, I said simply, looking directly at my father. Because 10 years ago, I was told my choices were a waste and a fantasy and an embarrassment to the family name, so I stopped using the Harper name professionally. I built my career as Daniel Foster, Lauren's name, because I didn't want any association with this family or this legacy. I wanted what I achieved to be completely mine. My mother found her voice, but it came out shaky. Daniel, if we'd known, she started, but I cut her off. If you'd known what, Mom? I asked. If you'd known I was successful on your terms, you would have accepted me? If you'd known there was money involved, you would have been proud? That's exactly the problem. You only care now because the work I do can be measured in dollars and valuations. You still don't actually understand or respect what I create. You just see that it's profitable. Drew stepped forward, his flush face. Danny, that's not fair, he said. We didn't know what you were doing. You cut us out. You left and never looked back. I turned to my brother, feeling a decade of frustration rising. You're right. I did leave. After Dad told me my passion was worthless and cut me off financially. After Mom cried about being embarrassed by my choices. After this entire family made it clear that unless I followed the Harper playbook, I wasn't welcome. So yeah, I left. And I built something amazing without any of you. And now you're upset that you weren't included? That's rich, Drew. Jennifer, my cousin, spoke up from the back of the crowd. I think what everyone's trying to say is, we're proud of you, Daniel, she said, her voice careful. We just wish we'd known sooner. I looked at her, at all of them, these people who'd watched me be pushed out and said nothing. Why? I asked. So you could take credit for it? So the Harper name could be attached to my success? So Mom could tell her charity board friends about her son, the innovative game designer? I spent 10 years deliberately keeping you all out of my professional life because every time I was associated with this family, it felt like they owned a piece of what I'd built, and they didn't. You all forfeited any claim to my success when you decided my dreams weren't worthy of your support. The crowd had grown silent again, uncomfortable with the raw honesty spilling out in what should have been a polite holiday reunion. My mother looked like she might cry, though whether from genuine emotion or social embarrassment, I couldn't tell. My father's jaw was clenched, his eyes hard. Margaret backed away slightly, sensing this was no longer a conversation she should be part of. Emily stood frozen near the stairs, her face conflicted. But it was Olivia who broke the tension, stepping forward with her phone held up. Uncle Danny, can I ask you something? She said, her voice sincere despite the chaos around us. I nodded. The environmental science class I'm taking, we're doing a project on sustainable technology and climate solutions. Could I interview you for it? About Watershed and the new VR project and how gaming can change people's perspective on environmental issues? I felt some of the anger drain out of me, replaced with something gentler. Of course you can, I told her. Anytime you want. I'd be happy to help with your project. She grinned, genuinely delighted. and I saw a flash of the little girl who used to sneak into my room to see my sketches. My mother seized on the moment, trying to regain control of the situation. "Well, that's settled then,"
said, her voice overly bright. "This has been quite the revelation. Daniel, why don't you and Laura," she corrected herself quickly at Lauren's look, "why don't you and Lauren join us in the dining room for cocktails before dinner? I'm sure we can make room at the main table after all." There was something desperate in the invitation, a scramble to recategorize me now that I couldn't be dismissed as the family failure. I looked at Lauren, who raised an eyebrow. "Your call," she said quietly. "We can stay or go." I thought about it for a moment. Thought about sitting at that main table with people who'd spent a decade assuming I'd amounted to nothing. Thought about enduring a dinner where they'd suddenly pretend to care about my work, ask questions designed to assess my worth, try to find ways to benefit from my success. And I realized I didn't want any of it. "Actually, Mom," I said, my voice tired, "I think we're going to head out. This was a mistake. I thought maybe enough time had passed that we could reconnect as adults, but I see now that nothing's really changed. You're only interested in me now because my success looks good on paper. You still don't actually care about the work itself or why it matters. You just see the dollar signs and the status." My mother's face crumpled. "Daniel, please," she said, "don't leave like this. We want to understand. We want to be part of your life." "Do you?" I asked. "Because you've had 10 years to want that. You had my phone number, my email. You could have reached out any time to actually understand what I was doing. But you didn't. Not until you heard I'd made something profitable. That tells me everything I need to know about what you value." My father stepped forward, his voice hard. "You're being unreasonable," he said. "We're trying to extend an olive branch here, and you're throwing it back in our faces." "An olive branch would have been inviting me to sit with my family at my family's dinner," I replied, "not relegating me to the overflow pavilion until you found out I was worth paying attention to. That's not reconciliation, Dad. That's status management." Drew looked genuinely distressed now. "Danny, come on," he said. "Stay for dinner. Let's talk about all this like adults. We can work through it." I shook my head. "There's nothing to work through, Drew. You all made your choices and I made mine. I'm successful and happy and married to an incredible woman, and I did all of it without the Harper name or Harper money or Harper approval. I don't need this family to validate my life. I never did. That was the whole point." Emily moved then, crossing the room to stand in front of me. Her eyes were wet, but she wasn't crying. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I should have stood up for you back then. I should have stayed in touch better. I was a coward and I'm sorry." I felt my own throat tighten. "Em, you were a kid when I left," I said. "This isn't on you." She shook her head. "I wasn't a kid the whole time," she said. "I was an adult for most of it, and I still let them push you out because it was easier than fighting. That's on me. But for what it's worth, I really am proud of you. What you built with Watershed, the work you're doing, it matters. It helps people. That's more than most of us can say." I hugged her then, brief and tight. "Thanks, Em," I said. "That means something." She pulled back and smiled, sad but genuine. "Stay in touch this time?" she asked. "Actually stay in touch, not just holiday texts?" I nodded. "I will if you will." Olivia bounded over, seemingly immune to the tension in the room. "Uncle Danny, before you go, can I get your actual contact info?" she asked. "For the interview, but also just, to talk? You're literally the coolest person in this family, and I feel like I've been missing out." I laughed, despite everything, and pulled out my phone. "Here," I said, opening my contacts. "Put your number in and I'll text you. We'll set something up." She typed quickly, grinning. "This Thanksgiving just got way more interesting than I expected," she said. "Sorry your family sucks at being a family, but I'm really glad I got to actually meet you." Lauren touched my arm, gently. "Ready?" she asked, and I nodded. We turned toward the door, and I could feel the weight of everyone watching us leave. My mother made one last attempt.
"Daniel, please don't go like this," she said, her voice breaking. "We can figure this out. We're family." I paused at the door, looking back at the assembled crowd. Being family isn't just biology, Mom. It's showing up for people, supporting them even when they choose differently than you'd choose. Being proud of them for who they are, not just for how they make you look. You never did any of that for me. So no, we're not really family. We're just people who share DNA and a last name I don't even use anymore. With that, Lauren and I walked out into the cold November afternoon, leaving the Harper estate and everyone in it behind. The drive back to Seattle was quiet for the first hour. Lauren drove again while I stared out the window, processing everything that had just happened. Finally, she broke the silence. "How are you feeling?" I asked. I thought about it, taking inventory of my emotions. "Surprisingly okay," I said. "Lighter, actually. Like I'd been carrying this weight of unfinished business and now it's done. I don't need their approval or their acceptance. I really don't, and proving that to myself felt good." Lauren smiled, reaching over to take my hand. "I'm proud of you," she said. "That took guts, walking away when they were offering to let you back in." "It wasn't really letting me back in," I said. "It was letting me sit at the table now that I'd proven myself on their terms. That's not acceptance. That's capitulation." She squeezed my hand. "Still, it couldn't have been easy." "I know," I said, "but you know what? The people who matter were there. Emily apologized and meant it. Olivia was amazing, and I had you. That's more family than that whole house full of people pretending to care because it's socially appropriate." We stopped for coffee at a rest stop halfway home, sitting in the car and watching the gray Oregon sky. My phone buzzed with a text from Emily. "Thank you for coming today," it read, "and thank you for being honest with all of us. We needed to hear it, even if it hurt. I'm gonna do better about staying connected. Promise." Another text came through, this one from Olivia, with a string of excited emojis and a gif from Watershed. "Already started my project research. You're gonna help me ace this class. Also, you and Lauren are invited to my birthday next month if you want to come. No pressure, but it would be cool." I showed the texts to Lauren. "See," she said, "the right people find their way through." I texted both of them back, warm responses full of genuine affection, and felt that lightness expand. My phone buzzed again, and I expected another message from Emily or Olivia. Instead, it was from my mother. "Daniel," the text read, "I know I've handled this poorly, all of it, from the beginning until now. I'd like a chance to talk, really talk, not at a family dinner with everyone watching. Would you be willing to meet for
Coffee sometime? Just us? I stared at the message for a long moment. Lauren glanced over. Your mom? She asked. I nodded. She wants to meet for coffee. Talk things through. Lauren raised an eyebrow. What do you think? I don't know, I said honestly. Part of me thinks it's too late. Part of me wants to believe she means it. You don't have to decide right now, Lauren said. Sit with it for a while. See how you feel in a few days. If you want to meet her, I'll support you. If you don't, I'll support that too. I put my phone away and leaned back in my seat. Right now, I just want to go home, I said. Our home, where there's no hierarchy or status games or judgment. Just us and the life we built. Lauren started the car, pulling back onto the highway towards Seattle. Then that's exactly where we're going, she said. And we drove north through the darkening afternoon, leaving Portland and the Harper family behind, heading toward the life that was entirely, completely ours. The article ran in Portland Business Journal the next morning as scheduled, featuring a photo of me at Evergreen's Seattle office. The headline reading, Local Success Story, Daniel Foster Leading Environmental Gaming Revolution. By noon, it had been picked up by 3 national tech publications. My phone exploded with notifications over the next few days. Messages from colleagues congratulating me on the article, interview requests from gaming podcasts and tech blogs, even venture capitalists reaching out about future projects.
Mixed in were messages from Harper family members I hadn't heard from in years. Cousin Jennifer sent a long text about how she'd always believed in me and would love to grab lunch next time I was in Portland. Uncle Thomas forwarded the article, saying he was impressed and wanted to discuss potential real estate investments for my obvious success. Brandon suddenly remembered we'd been close as kids and thought we should reconnect. I deleted most of them without responding. These weren't people who cared about me or my work. They saw an opportunity, a connection to something they perceived as valuable. It was exactly what I had expected, and exactly why I'd kept my professional life separate from the Harper name for so long. But there were messages that mattered. Emily texted every day that week. Small things. A funny meme, a question about my work, a childhood photo. She was trying, genuinely trying, and I appreciated it, even when I was too busy to respond immediately. Olivia sent her project outline and asked detailed questions about Watershed's development that showed real research beyond just playing the game. My mother kept texting, not pushy messages, just simple ones. "Good morning, Daniel. Hope you're having a good week. The article was wonderful. You should be very proud. I'd like to talk when you have time. No pressure." I didn't respond to those. I wasn't ready. Wasn't sure I'd ever be ready, and didn't want to give false hope that one coffee meeting would fix 10 years of damage. Lauren watched me navigate it all with patient understanding. She'd seen me hurt by this family before, held me through nights when I'd questioned everything about my choices and worth. She wasn't going to push me toward reconciliation if I wasn't ready for it. Work became my focus, a welcome distraction from family drama. The promotion to creative director came with new responsibilities and challenges that required my full attention. I was leading a team of 15 designers and developers on Evergreen's most ambitious project yet, a fully immersive virtual reality experience that would let players participate in ecological restoration efforts around the world. The budget was bigger than anything I'd worked with before. The timeline was aggressive, and the expectations were sky high. I threw myself into it completely, spending long days at the office and bringing work home most nights. Lauren was understanding, but started making comments about balance. "You're allowed to enjoy your success," she'd say when she found me working at midnight. "You don't have to prove anything to anyone anymore." But I did feel like I had something to prove, not to my family, but to myself. I wanted this project to succeed beyond anyone's expectations. I wanted it to be undeniable proof that my choices had been right, that the path I had taken had value beyond just financial success. I wanted to create something that mattered, that changed how people thought about environmental issues, that made a real difference in the world. 3 weeks after Thanksgiving, Emily called instead of texting. I almost didn't answer, was actually reaching to decline the call when Lauren gave me a look. "It's your sister," she said. "Just talk to her." I sighed and answered. "Em? What's up?" There was a pause on the other end, then her voice, smaller than usual. "Can we meet?" she asked. "I'm going to be in Seattle this weekend for medical conference at the hospital. I was hoping we could have dinner, just us. No family politics, no drama. I just want to see you." Something in her tone made me agree before I'd fully thought it through. Saturday came, and I found myself nervous in a way I hadn't expected.
Was my little sister. Someone I'd once been close to, but 10 years and a family rift had created distance that felt strange to bridge now. I met her at a quiet restaurant in Capitol Hill, arriving early and second-guessing the decision up until she walked through the door. Emily looked different than she had at Thanksgiving, more relaxed, in jeans and a sweater instead of formal dinner attire, her hair down, less of the polished Harper perfection and more of the sister I remembered. We hugged, awkward at first, then warmer, and sat down across from each other. For a moment, neither of us knew what to say. Then Emily laughed, a nervous sound. "This is weird, right?" she said.
We used to talk about everything, and now I don't even know where to start. I smiled, despite my guardedness. Start anywhere, I said. How's the medical conference? She launched into a description of the pediatric oncology sessions she'd been attending, the new treatment protocols being developed, the challenges of her work. When she paused for breath, I asked her about her life beyond work. She told me about her partner Marcus, a fellow doctor she'd been dating for 2 years. Mom doesn't love that he's not from a wealthy family, Emily said with a wry smile, but he's amazing, and I don't really care what she thinks anymore. That surprised me and must have shown on my face because Emily continued, seeing you walk away from that Thanksgiving dinner, hearing you call them out on their conditional love, it woke something up in me. I realized I'd been living my whole life trying to earn approval that comes with strings attached. I'm tired of it. We talked for 3 hours. Not about the family drama, not about Thanksgiving, just about our lives. She asked real questions about my work, wanted to understand not just what Watershed was, but why it mattered to me. What drove me to create games about environmental restoration. I found myself opening up more than I'd expected, telling her about the vision for the VR project, the challenges of leading a bigger team, the pressure of living up to my own standards. She got it in a way I hadn't anticipated. We're both perfectionists, she said, both trying to prove something, maybe to ourselves more than anyone else. The difference is you figured out how to do it on your own terms. I'm still working on that. When we finally left the restaurant, standing on the sidewalk in the cool Seattle evening, Emily hugged me again. I've missed you, she said quietly. I've missed having a brother who actually sees me as a person and not just another Harper family asset. Can we do this again? Actually stay in touch this time? I hesitated, old wariness making me cautious, but her sincerity seemed real. Yeah, I said. I'd like that. The weeks that followed fell into a new rhythm. Work remained intense, but fulfilling. The VR project was coming together better than I'd hoped, early tests showing that the immersive experience was even more impactful than traditional gaming platforms. Players weren't just learning about environmental restoration, they were experiencing it firsthand, seeing the immediate results of their choices in ways that created genuine emotional investment. Emily and I texted regularly, mostly mundane stuff about our days, but occasionally deeper conversations about family dynamics and finding our own paths. Olivia sent me her finished environmental science project, and it was genuinely impressive. She'd interviewed me extensively, incorporated Watershed into her analysis of educational technology and environmental awareness, and created a presentation that her teacher apparently loved. She got an A+ and sent me a photo of her grade with approximately 17 exclamation points. You're my favorite uncle, her text read, and I don't care that you're technically the weird one the family doesn't talk about. Actually, that probably makes you cooler. But my mother's texts continued, persistent without being overwhelming. Once or twice a week, she'd send something brief. Thinking of you. Hope work is going well. Still hoping we can talk. I never responded, but I never blocked her either. I wasn't sure what I wanted from her or if I wanted anything at all. The anger had faded into something more complicated, a mix of old hurt and new indifference, and maybe a small part of me that wondered if genuine change was possible. Lauren never pushed me on it, just reminded me occasionally that whatever I decided was okay. That I didn't owe anyone forgiveness or reconciliation just because they decided they wanted it now. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.